Welcome to Empower Ed, a PK podcast where we talk about the issues that matter most to families, schools, and communities. I'm Ileana Gallego, and together we're unlocking the power of education. Our guest today is Ángel Rentería, Communications Associate at the Student Debt Crisis Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to centering the voices of borrowers to influence public policy and ultimately end the student debt crisis. Angel is deeply passionate about reforming the higher education system in the United States to ensure equitable access to a degree and the elimination of burdensome student debt. He earned his BA in political science from the University of California, Riverside, where he actively advocated for UC students to amplify their voices at the local, state, and federal levels. As a student loan borrower himself, Angel firmly believes that people seeking an education should not feel the financial ramifications of paying off student loans years after graduation. Angel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So, to start off, I think we need to talk a little bit about the Student Debt Crisis Center and its mission. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the Student Debt Crisis Center, the term student debt crisis was actually coined by our founder, Natalia Abrams. She started the nonprofit organization when she herself noticed the disparities that students post graduation were facing in terms of paying back their student loan debt. She was very instrumental in making sure that the student debt issue was seen as a crisis as it affects families, American borrowers across the entire country. And our mission is to one day we dream of having a country that does not have student loan debt. Because as of this year, it has toppled over $1.7 trillion,
Wow.
which is an astronomical amount of money
Of
and
student debt? That's
of student debt. Yes.
wow. Mhm.
And it's not only impacting people financially, also emotionally, mentally. They're deciding whether they pay their student loans or they go ahead and put food on the table. So, right now, with everything going on, we want to focus on educating as many people as we can by getting the crucial information and updates to them for borrowers across the country and ensuring that we are working towards a future in which student loan debt does not exist.
So, what part of educating do you think would be beneficial?
Of course. So we all probably heard around sometime this year about the very infamous Big Beautiful Bill that was being thrown around in Washington, D.C. And a lot of those changes hurt American student loan borrowers and their families. And what comes a result of that is a lot of confusion, a lot of disinformation, because there are people that take advantage of vulnerable borrowers by promising them fake scams of, oh, we're here to cancel your student loan debt, send us X amount of money. A lot of people don't know that. So, one thing to make very clear from the beginning is that this information is free. This information is accessible to everyone, and no one that is legitimate should have to charge you to get this information. So we have a series of ways of getting this information to people, whether it's through conversations like this,
Mhm.
right? Or hosting workshops and webinars. We host those more frequently given all these changes, since the student loan landscape is already very confusing. And by the time these changes go into effect, it's going to be much more confusing because especially for folks who have been paying for over 20 to 30 years, and every single decade it's a completely new system, it could be very overwhelming.
Mhm.
So we try to inform as many people as possible through different modalities, whether it's in person, events that we have, workshops. Um, we used to offer back in a couple years prior during the Biden administration one-on-one consultations with borrowers. So we're just trying to really hone in right now on what issues are impacting borrowers the most and how can we get them the resources that they need.
Okay. And with all these changes that are going on, what would you say, or from the conversations that you've had, what are those issues that are impacting borrowers the most?
Yes, I would say the number one issue is affordability. Student loan payments are very expensive. We've seen borrowers that have student loan payments that are as much as 1 month's worth of rent. And it's very burdensome, especially if you have children, dependents, a family, or if you want to start a family, you want to buy a house. Student loan debt hinders the ability to do that. And with all the changes going on, student loan payments are going to get more expensive. The administration tries to frame it in a way that it's going to get more affordable. It may for very, very, very few people, but overall, it's going to get more expensive for everyone. A lot of people think of the new plan as the repayment assistance plan that is framed to be good for borrowers. In reality, it's not. There are there are people that are going to see spikes up to $300 a month more in their student loan payments. And for someone that already is struggling to afford that, it's going to make it more difficult for them to pay back starting next year. In addition to that, all new borrowers are only going to have access to two repayment plans that are very, very expensive than the current ones that exist. And a lot of the repayment plans that are more affordable are being rolled back and are not going to allow for folks to have more affordable monthly payments to sustain themselves.
Mhm. And what are the other options? Like, what happens right now? You mentioned that there's people that have been paying off their debt for 20, 30 years. That feels like overwhelming, like never ending, along with all the other expenses that come, like you mentioned, once you have a family or when you buy a house. Um, so, what are the options if you don't want to go through that?
So if you don't want to go through that, if you're a future borrower or you're planning on borrowing money, this may sound very repetitive and a lot of people say this, but only borrow what you need.
Mm.
Because sometimes a lot of people may think, oh, it's okay. I'll pay it off in the long run. I'll pay it off when I'm older. Even if it's a couple $100 that you don't borrow, it makes a huge difference. Because a lot of people also don't know that student loans accrue interest day,
Every day?
every day. So that creates large amounts of interest that are just being paid, and you're barely touching the principal.
Mhm.
So if you only borrow what you need, if you or someone you know is going to school, just advise them to only borrow what they need. Apply to scholarships, apply for grants, seek alternative funding, because no one should have to feel that burden of 20, 30 years. That's as much as a mortgage in repaying a debt that is more like a consequence of pursuing an education, right? And for people who are currently in the student loan system, I would say the biggest recommendation is to one, know your options. If you're in one of the most affordable plans, it's very important to know that they may go away for some of them. So, for example, Save, that's one of the ones that has been in the headlines given court injunctions and multiple, headlines that it's been making.
Safe?
It's called Saving on a Valuable Education. It was one of the most comprehensive student loan income driven repayment plans in the Biden administration. And there's a lot of people that are enrolled in that program because it would offer them a low monthly payment. And it's very likely it may go away. So it's something to keep in mind that borrowers need to know their options and plan ahead of what is to come.
And what happens
Now,
with the ones that are already in that program, like the ones that are already in SAFE? It continues, or is that gonna be a problem?
that's going to be a problem
Really?
if I'm being very frank. Yes.
Wow.
Um, Save right now is being held up in the courts because a lot of, let's say, stakeholders aren't too happy with how the program was laid out.
Mhm.
So with that, it creates a lot of uncertainty. And that's something that's been eating borrowers alive so much because they don't know what's going to happen. People who are in save right now are placed in a forbearance, and that means they don't have to make a monthly payment,
Okay.
but their interest just started accruing again in August. So you have these balances that are growing, they're ballooning, but they don't have to make a payment.
Mhm.
And the issue comes here that when the fate of save gets decided, these borrowers who are uninformed are going to be in a very, very tight predicament as to their options are going to be limited.
Mhm.
So if borrowers want to know what to do if they are in Save or want to know their options, my strongest recommendation is to attend one of our workshops that we have tailored towards Save. And we're going to be hosting those in a more frequent basis as a lot of this uncertainty keeps growing around Save.
Okay. And then in general, what happens with I have um if I had a loan like 20 years ago and then suddenly I just can't pay it off anymore, what happens to those people? I remember you told me before when we spoke that you have heard stories that are really sad because people have been paying up for like 20 years and suddenly I can't and they're in big trouble.
Yeah, so unfortunately, there are approximately 10 million Americans that are in default.
Default.
And when you default on a loan, it's after you've missed 9 months of payments. And the consequences are just awful, to put it at least. We're talking wage garnishments. There used to be Social Security offsets, but this administration went ahead and made it clear, as at least as of now,
Mhm.
people's Social Security is not getting touched. It bars you from any future federal assistance. So that could entail maybe you're you want to get a more high paying job in the federal government because you're in default, it doesn't let you get that job. And the most notable one is your credit score tanks. It drops at astronomical levels, and it's a very, very derogatory mark to have on your credit report.
Okay.
And a lot of people that are in default, the vast majority, is people who have been in repayment for more than 20 years and their balances are less than $5,000.
No.
So we're talking about smaller loans that people just don't have the money to pay those extra $100, extra $50 a month
Mhm.
to get out of default or to afford their monthly payment. And what makes things even more sad on top of that is that most of these borrowers also tend to be are elderly.
Mm.
So these are people who have retired. They can't work anymore and they still have these excruciating amounts of debt. So the best thing to do if you are behind on your payments or if you think you're going to fall behind, communicate with the company that services your student loans, otherwise known as your servicer. Just give them a call. As long as the wait time may be, it's very worthwhile being able to tell them, "I'm going through a really hard time right now. I just need some relief." And they will give you a forbearance. Those are discretionary, hardship forbearances. If you tell the person on the phone, "I just can't afford it right now," they'll place you on a forbearance, which means you do not have to make payments at that time, and it'll tell you more details as to that.
Mhm.
If you're in default, that's when things get a bit more tricky. But, like, for default, there is a lot more specifics that I could ramble on for for so long, and I would recommend also for those folks to attend our workshop on default and delinquency so we can answer their questions and provide the resources that we offer to them.
Okay, perfect. So now let's talk about the new students or the parents that are thinking of sending their students to college. What are good tips that you can give them
Mhm.
for student loans?
Yes, so I think I just wanna preface that despite everything going on, there is a lot of conversation whether a college degree is worth it or not. At least in my opinion, I feel like there's nothing like you can't put a price tag on education.
Mhm.
And it's very disheartening that in this country, the price tag is really high, where the fruit of the fruit result of of receiving an education does so much for this country, right? And there should be more stimulus going into that. But given the current higher education landscape, it's really, really good to know again your options. I know that might sound a bit repetitive, but it's true.
Mhm.
Community colleges are a great avenue to go ahead and get started. and from there transfer to a four-year institution, right? So it may make costs cheaper
Mm-hmm.
because, for example, when I was in college last year, there was an approximate $37,000 per year of cost of attendance for a University of California school, a UC. And that number is projected to go up, right? For a Cal State, it's approximately that of 13 to $15,000, right? So the least amount you could borrow, the better.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with winning community. There's a lot of stigma around that. It's still quality education that you're receiving. And we actually project to see an increased number of enrollment in community colleges with all these changes going on, and then the transfer to a four-year institution to receive a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
If you do decide to go to a four-year institution, again, there's nothing wrong with that. Just really know your options. Depending on the state in which the university is located in, is also dependent on how much aid they may give. For example, here in California, there are different types of state-based aid that get given to students, such as the Cal Grant. Cal Grant aid is meant to cover most tuition for whatever institution it is, only if you meet certain criteria, which is a GPA requirement, an age requirement, and a continuation of progress towards a degree, right? But being mindful, if there are listeners in other states, really exploring what options exist in those states for any state aid. And also, don't be afraid to ask your institution for more aid. Even if it's, like I said, even if it's like a couple $100 or something, as the least as you could borrow, the better. Another thing to keep in mind is that for new students, especially undergraduate students, you can borrow more than the cost of attendance of that school. So that also may leave out a lot of implicit costs or indirect costs, such as housing. It might be more expensive than 1 year or stuff like that. So if you could find a way to only borrow what of like the least amount possible, whether it's just your tuition or just whatever you need to pay to the school directly, the better. And then everything for else for housing, just really cut back on costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of different ways you could go ahead and address what school you're gonna go to. Where am I going to apply to, right? And especially because it's college season, a lot of people are applying for colleges right now. So it's just something to be very mindful of when applying to college, because the repayments plan that if they do borrow money that they're gonna be put into when they graduate is going to be very expensive and very restrictive. And they could find themselves, if they can't afford it, in up to 30 years of repayment. So let's say the incoming class, they're going to graduate, let's see what year it is, 26, 2030. They would be repaying until the year
26.
2060.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until they're over 50 years old,
Yes.
also in their 50s. Okay. Tell me about, because we talked about this before and I found it so interesting. People looking for information in AI.
Hmm.
Is
Yeah.
it a good
So,
idea?
so very point blank period. Do not ask ChatGPT. Do not ask AI for student loan advice. Um, AI, as we know, it can be incorrect, right? So the information you might get on there may be wrong to your own individual situation. The best way to remain informed is receiving it through credible sources. What do credible sources look like? It is the Department of Education themselves. Despite everything going on with the federal government, what better than the ones who are overseeing everything pertaining to student loans than the Department of Education? Another trusted source, your loan servicer. They are the ones that get contracted by the federal government to oversee your student loan account. Some servicers are Mohila, Advantage, Nelnet, etc. And those communications tend to be the most personalized depending on your own student loan situation. And then, of course, us, the Student Debt Crisis Center. We work very closely with receiving the most up to date information straight out of Washington, D.C. And we also go ahead and work with other organizations that work in vein with the line of work that we do. So we work with different advocacy groups, we work with legal like professionals. So we really go ahead and get as much clarity, as much information as possible to ensure that folks receive the information that they need. But please don't ask ChatGPT for advice.
Mm.
Also, if you see something on social media, right now there's been a lot of headlines that are getting misconstrued that, oh, President Trump is forgiving student loans. That's not what's happening. So just keep in mind there are a lot of people trying to sensationalize a lot of the headlines, and what better than to get information from the source themselves.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Tell me, where can they go in Student Debt Crisis Center? I know you have social media, you have the websites. Tell us about your workshops. Like, what can resources can we offer our listeners?
Yeah, so we have our website where we go ahead and post our website our workshops that are upcoming for the month. And the website is studentdebtcrisis.org.
And then your social media is Debt Crisis.
Datacrisis.org.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, it's a mouthful at times. And, there we post our websites our workshops on our website, and we also provide updates on our social media. So we go ahead and share articles, we go ahead and share facts. We do a series where we debunk myths and facts about student loans. So with, for example, people were saying like, "Oh, payments are starting for Save this month," and no, they're not, you know? So really providing a lot of clarity there. Um, and then in terms of our workshops, we are going to be hosting them more frequently. So we have one actually today. We're talking about just the general student loan landscape for folks who are first time joiners to go ahead and learn how student loans work. Then we have another one next week that's about the Save plan. So it's only going to be folks who are in Save and want to get clarity on what to do. And then the next day, we also have another workshop around default and delinquency for folks who have questions about what options they have available to them if they're falling behind or can't afford their payments, right? Then we have some other workshops in the works, such as the changes for the future through the reconciliation package or the one big beautiful bill. And a lot and lot more. So, definitely stay posted with what information we have to offer and the resources that we share, because sometimes our partners also have amazing resources and events, and we just love sharing that information because there are 45 million student loan borrowers in this country, and that's a big number. So, as much as information as possible as we can diffuse, whether you or someone you know has student loans, please share this information with them.
And these are all workshops online, right?
They're all online, as many people as would like to
So
join.
they just need to go to your website and register for the one that they're interested in.
Yes, that would be studentdebtcrisis.org to register for our workshops.
And what would you suggest, for example, if the workshop that I need is not in the next month, but I do want to talk to somebody in Student Debt Crisis Center?
Yeah, so you could always on our website, there's also a contact us button. So
Okay.
you could go ahead and fill out the form and someone will get in touch with you from our team. Most likely give us a couple of days because we do get a bit of an influx. So I would say maybe 2 or 3 business days to hear back from us. But if we're able to help, we'll be more than happy to. And one thing to also bring up is that we are not lawyers or financial counselors. We're just advocates that are here to help, right? So all the information that we get is from our partners and from this research that we do. So definitely keep an eye out for any kind of resources that we may share, but we can't offer any legal or financial advice.
Hmm. And then just I'm thinking for the parents that are listening to us, there is a way, right? So
Mhm.
don't be so scared, don't be overwhelmed with because you as a parent, one is very scared with those prices that you hear for college. So, but you're telling me there is a way. We just need to get informed.
There is a way, yes. You just have to be informed, know your options, talk to your children, and have those honest conversations. Okay, like where do you want to go to school? What are we going to do here? Because at least in my case, when I was talking to my parents as they have never navigated the US education system before. I'm like, "Amma, I don't know if I need to just
Mhm.
drop $37,000 right now to go to school."
Mhm.
And I didn't know there was a
It's
thing called
scary.
financial aid. It's scary, it's
Mhm.
overwhelming, and, so definitely getting as much information as you can. You're not alone. If
Mhm.
you're hearing this the first time and it's confusing, we've heard it 10 times and it's gonna also be confusing.
Mhm.
So, just rest assured that you're not alone in this journey.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Am I missing any other information that you want to share before we? Go.
I would just say, information is key right now, right? We really don't know how the coming years may play out with all these massive changes to the student loan landscape and to higher education as a whole. So it's very, very important to staying up to date with everything
Mhm,
and just remembering that, when things get a bit grim or there's a lot of uncertainty, there is always a way.
mhm,
And what better way to make those decisions than by having the right information and making the decision that's best for you, your children, and your family.
mhm. Thank you very much. Angel, I want to thank you for being here with us today, for sharing your insights and for the important work that you're doing to support students and drive meaningful change in our higher education system. Conversations like this remind us how critical it is to stay informed, to ask the right questions, and to advocate for policies that make college more accessible and affordable for all. So, thank you very much for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much, Eliana. Thank you for having me.
So, whether you're a student, a parent, or someone planning for the future, we hope today's episode gave you valuable tools and insights to better navigate the student loan landscape. Be sure to follow us for more conversations like this, so stay tuned for more information. Thank you for listening.